So first we will hear from Will Rogers, who is President and CEO of the Trust for Public Land. This is a national nonprofit that conserves land for people to enjoy as parks, playgrounds, community gardens, farms, historic places, and wilderness. This morning in our partner open mic, we heard from Jad Daly about TPL. So for those who couldn't hear him, you'll get to hear some more. Will Rogers is a nationally recognized advocate for land conservation and has given major addresses and interviews to the Urban Land Institute, National Smart Growth Conference, National Brownfields Conference, Talk of the Nations, among many others. Before joining TPL, he managed infill urban redevelopment projects for a Chicago real estate development company. And before becoming a developer and then an undeveloper, as it says in his bio, he was a commercial beekeeper, founding and managing a commercial honey production company in Bogota. He's a graduate of Stanford University, received his MBA from Harvard, and he lives with his family in Kensington, California, and continues to keep honeybees in his backyard. Thank you, Will.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? I'm a little tall for this mic. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here amongst a bunch of great thinkers, conservationists, urban activists, and the opportunity to help put forward an initiative that I think is very important to the future of conservation in America. For nearly 4 decades now, the Trust for Public Land has been a proud partner of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we've been working on refuges across the country, primarily on helping them either acquire land to create refuges or to expand their refuges. But now I hope that with our Land for People mission and the work that we do in cities across the country, creating parks, trails, greenways, and playgrounds, and the service's growing commitment to connect with urban populations, that we're going to be opening a whole new chapter in our partnership. I want to offer a big thanks to the conference organizers for including the Robert Michael Pyle reading in the background material. When I first read his Thunder Tree about his growing up in the 50s and 60s in the outskirts of Denver, playing along the Highline irrigation ditch, one statement really stuck with me. And it's a statement that showed up in the current reading. It's a statement that I've repeated over the years. And I think it goes to the heart of the people-nature connection and why it's so important, and also highlights the impact of Robert Michael Pyle, what he calls local extinctions. And he wrote, "Those who care conserve, those who don't know don't care. What's the extinction of the condor to a child who has never known a wren?" And with the release of the new vision for the refuge system in 2011, Conserving the Future, Wildlife Refuges for the Next Generation, the service made clear that it shares the Trust for Public Lands perspective on the importance of the people-nature connection and also on the challenging trends that we face. At the Trust for Public Land, we have always seen people as the overlooked species. And that costs us in several ways. Not only do people without that connection with nature in their human habitat suffer diminished lives and arguably less healthy lives, but they also are much less likely to be the constituency that will support other species and wild nature. So we see the service's move to connect with more people in more places as an important complement to your long-standing mission to protect fish and wildlife, including the most vulnerable populations and the most pristine habitats in the country. And we applaud the service for including the needs of people in cities as part of your vision for the future. Your approach recognizes the fact that nature and the outdoors begin as soon as we open our front door. Those small and closer to home connections with natural areas, even if those places aren't the crowns of the continent, can help build the conservation constituency of the future. So I want to share a few thoughts about why this connection in cities between people and nature is more important now than ever, and then share some of our observations on the what and the how of urban conservation in the 21st century. Now, as conservationists and outdoor enthusiasts, and as a nation, we're facing some very challenging trends to maintain these connections between people and nature. It's a short list, it's depressing, I'll get through it quickly, but these are things we know, but we have to keep in mind, and it's why it's more important now than ever. We've become an urban nation, as we've all said. 80% of us live in metro areas. Our demographics are becoming far more diverse, with some very different ethnic and cultural relationships with the land and the outdoors. And Dr. Murdoch and Iantha Gant-Wright will tell you more about this after I'm finished. We've paved over a lot of nature, 2 to 3 million acres a year, mostly at the edges of our cities, making our connection and interaction a whole lot more difficult and leading to a lot more of what Pyle calls local extinctions. Our connection with the outdoors is diminishing for another reason. Our kids are spending untold hours in front of TV screens or computer games or smartphones, making wild nature remote and even scary for many. Federal studies show that outdoor recreation activity is down due to lack of time, convenience, and other competing activities. And we also have a different kind of sprawl going on. We are becoming an obese nation. A third of us are obese, and that's leading to epidemic levels of diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension. The average American male weighs about 40 pounds more today than he did a half a century ago. I probably weigh 40 more pounds myself. And we're not a whole lot taller than we were 50 years ago. So we got a real problem there with public health. So these kinds of sobering trends have led me to think about what I call healthy human habitat and the critical role that natural connections at all scales and in all kinds of environments can play in helping us live healthy and more fulfilling lives. Now, some of those connections have to be close to home. And for urbanites, that means neighborhood parks, gardens, even green school playgrounds with trees and gardens where kids can get their hands in the dirt and learn how things grow. To measure that close-to-home access, the Trust for Public Land has come up with a pretty simple metric, the 10-minute walk or a half mile. And we believe that no child should be more than a 10-minute walk from a park or a garden or a natural area or a safe green place to play. And those that don't have that access, we think of them as an endangered species. There are plenty of cities where as many as 2/3 of the residents don't have that close-to-home access. The Trust for Public Land developed an assessment tool called ParkScore that looks at the 50 largest cities in America and assesses park proximity, the 10-minute walk. It looks at park size, and it looks at spending on parks. Minneapolis, which came out at the top, serves about 95% of its residents. Charlotte, which was near the bottom, serves well less than half. And unfortunately, many cities are a lot closer to the Charlotte end than they are to the Minneapolis end. And let me be clear, we think that the close-to-home access and the 10-minute walk is just one measure of healthy human habitat. Another is the diversity of open spaces and experiences that a park system can provide, particularly through larger destination parks and refuges, where we can find a more critical mass of nature and other species. And I loved your point earlier that we shouldn't just be looking at our brand, we should be looking at our brand. And we should be looking at this holistically. So refuges go with destination parks, go with trails, go with greenways, go with urban gardens. It's all a holistic solution to reconnecting us with nature, not one agency's approach. We're all in this thing together, and we're all working to create a wonderful diversity of experiences for our urban populations. The reality is that urban wildlife habitat is as much a refuge for people suffering from nature deficit disorder or needing a respite from urban life as it is for migrating birds looking for a stopover. Real success in reconnecting our species with nature will require both improved access through small local neighborhood parks and making sure that the broader range of larger parks, restored riverways, recreational areas, and urban wildlife refuges offer quality experiences to urban dwellers. And this richer experience of nature is in short supply. One consistent finding in just about every city that we work in is that there's a real lack of access to the kinds of natural habitats and connections with fish and wildlife that are far more common and easily found in rural communities. So that's arguably enough of the why. I don't think you need any more statistics, any more rhetoric to convince you that what we're talking about here and this initiative of the service is incredibly important. I'm sure a lot of us came to our careers because of our connection with nature and with the outdoors. So let me talk about the what of human habitat, a healthy human habitat, and what that connection looks like and how we're going to get there in this 21st century. To illustrate the what and the how, I'm going to cite 3 examples. It gives a range of opportunity for people-nature connections in urban areas, from a new fish and wildlife refuge, to city-scale urban ecological restoration, to more intimate efforts that aim to restore fragments of nature wherever the opportunity arises. Now, I hope you'll recognize, woven through my comments, my appreciation for both the deep need as well as the real challenge that the service faces in conserving fish and wildlife resources in urban areas. This appreciation comes from our having worked for 4 decades and having done over 1,000 different projects in and around cities across America in this denser, more complex, land-constrained, and stakeholder-rich environment that we call cities. Now, getting conservative rural communities to go along with these efforts is hard enough. But I want to suggest from our experience that getting neighborhoods and cities rallied around urban projects is also a real challenge. So let's start at one end of the scale, creating a new urban wildlife refuge. We recognize that creating new refuges is a high bar for an agency that faces lean financial times, and we are all facing those financial times. I'll talk a little bit more about funding in just a minute when I get into the how of all this. Not only that, but you're already managing a huge amount of land and resources. Nevertheless, we have seen the remarkable range of technical expertise, programming, and other resources that a new refuge can bring to urban communities, and the unique pride that comes with recognition and investment by the federal government. Pride that your backyard is a really special place worth protecting. We saw this and more play out in the creation of the Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where we've been partnering with the service. For 10 years, a diverse and heavily Hispanic lower to middle income community on the edge of the city sought to protect their backyard and their river, the Rio Grande. This is a part of Albuquerque without much in the way of parks or public access to the Rio Grande River. There's a local dairy farm on the Rio Grande, Price's Dairy, that offered a great opportunity for conservation and for a new refuge. And that land is located within a 1-hour drive of 60% of the state's population. Now, fortunately, the urban vision of the service, with leadership from the regional level, from the director, with the generous helping of enthusiasm from then Secretary Salazar, coincided wonderfully with the vision of the local community at just the right time, bolstered by a $5 million upfront commitment from Bernalillo County. That always helps. So what comes out of this tremendous effort? Well, a lot you can hang your hats on. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the face of conservation in this city of over 1 million people. The service is already reaching a diverse set of constituencies: the neighbors, children, the Hispanic community, other urban dwellers, tourists, people from around the state. 570 acres will be protected along the Rio Grande. 261 acre-feet of senior water rights will be purchased by the service and other public agencies. And the service and other partners will pursue conservation and restoration of the Rio Grande and its native habitat. The refuge will connect with the El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro National Historic Trail. That's a mouthful. It's a 16th century trade route that once connected the Spanish capital in Mexico City with Texas and New Mexico. Land and Water Conservation Fund funding was leveraged at more than 1-to-1 from other sources county, state, local, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Bureau of Reclamation, but the service has full ownership and management. Many agencies, many people want this refuge to succeed. There's already an active Friends group working with the service on programming and outreach, and I think Terry Gilson is in the audience someplace. Terry, raise your hand. There you are. I also want to recognize Jennifer Owen White, who is the refuge manager, and doing a wonderful job for a refuge that's not really even open yet. You guys rock. National Public Lands Day is being celebrated there on Saturday with bilingual outreach ongoing, thus broadening the important national conversation about conservation. Programming is targeted to the next generation, even before formal opening of the new refuge. For example, the Next Gen Academy senior class spent a day recently learning about hydrology, field journaling, and surveying for plants and wildlife. A partnership with Mountain View Elementary School resulted in the service's Native Fish in the Classroom program, connecting with the fifth grade class. And all this is just the beginning of a long-term impact that's going to be coming out of this new urban refuge. And I really believe that this is how we're going to raise the next generation of conservationists, having the resource there and then figuring out how to connect. At the other end of the spectrum from a brand new refuge are efforts that seek to tuck a little bit more nature into the existing green spaces that border our city streets. One such example is our work in Los Angeles along the Reseda River Loop, where the Aliso Creek meets the Los Angeles River. It's a 2-acre project. It could easily have been another urban park, leveled off, planted with lots of grass, a few trees. It would have certainly satisfied the need for an urban park in that community. But the community members and the partners and our staff had a bigger vision. First off, they wanted to make sure it was connected, so there's now a 1-mile trail that connects this new 2-acre park to neighborhoods. And what will people find when they arrive? The 2-acre site, known as the Aliso Creek Confluence, is a uniquely important slice of undeveloped land in an intensely urban environment. Its location at the junction of two rivers makes it a natural habitat hotspot. So the project partners are committed to maximizing the habitat values on the property, using native plantings designed to attract birds and butterflies and other species. It will create interpretive signage so that visitors learn about the natural settings that they're enjoying, settings that many from that neighborhood probably have never seen before. I smile to think that a visitor to this park might see something new and unexpected that will have the capacity to make this 2-acre property seem a whole lot larger by engaging the heart and the imagination. After all, Robert Pyle points out that it only takes a butterfly. So finally, I want to talk perhaps about the most complex and ambitious way to approach this work, and that's at the city-wide scale. Our organization, along with many other public and private entities, is trying to help foster recovery and resilience in the areas impacted by Superstorm Sandy. We're tackling this work through a new partnership with the City of New York and Columbia and Drexel universities. And we're doing a research plan and then implementation of new green infrastructure projects, from large wetland complexes to riverfront parks, along the 520 miles of New York City's shoreline. And we're starting with the 2 areas hardest hit by Sandy, Jamaica Bay and Staten Island, placing a particular emphasis on using natural systems like wetlands to protect all New York City's residents from people to great blue herons. We've had a head start in our work because of a past partnership with New York State. We've protected and restored hundreds of acres of wetlands over the years, de facto refuges now, on the western edge of Staten Island using GIS planning from our Harbor Herons report from years ago. Now, as it turns out, these communities punctuated by wetlands actually suffered a whole lot less during the storm than those that didn't have that benefit. So we're continuing to work on Staten Island, but so much remains to be done. And remarkably, even in America's largest city, there are really thousands of acres of wetlands and other undeveloped land that are still available. Yes, they need restoration. Yes, they need work, but they are still there and available, although hundreds have already been purchased since Sandy. And really, it's a race against time to try to tie up as much of that land as we can. We think of this kind of systems-level restoration of urban green infrastructure, and it offers a profound and lasting approach to ensure that our cities are livable, that they're resilient, and that they're safe places for people that also offer that rich connection with nature just blocks from busy streets and industrial areas. The scientific expertise and other assets of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are already being brought to bear in the Sandy response effort and will be a linchpin to this kind of deep urban ecological restoration if we have any chance of success. So finally, let me talk a little bit about the how of getting all this done, particularly in cities. Beyond the big price tag for urban land, the difficulty of finding large tracts of land, and the likelihood that there's contamination or at least a need for restoration, there are a number of other elements that will govern success of this initiative. First of all, standards and metrics. Now, we at the Trust for Public Land, to help distinguish good parks from great parks and to provide a pathway to improvement, long ago created criteria and standards for an excellent urban park system. It's been exciting to see the service also use this concept and create a whole new set of standards for great urban refuges. Managing these places requires a different set of criteria and a different mental model. The service's new standards of excellence squarely name these differences and I think appropriately set expectations for the management of human uses as well as habitat. You've recognized that context matters in conservation. Now, measurability is important, and there are plenty of great metrics within your standards. But one important thing we also need to remember is it's not just about the delivery, it's not just about the actions we take, it's also about the quality of what we deliver. Is the outreach or programming compelling? Is the experience leading to the connection we're looking for, and are people coming back for more? The qualitative is hard to measure, but it is central to success. Another factor, lean in to local communities. I spoke earlier about the unique challenges of working in urban areas, in part due to the density of constituencies and sometimes competing interests. The flip side of that is the incredible power of a motivated urban constituency. A local agenda means building partnerships with civic organizations, businesses, and nonprofits who share your vision. All three of the examples I provided required multi-layered partnerships from the neighborhood, community level to multiple layers of government. We cannot stress enough the importance and the power of partnerships to build consensus for urban conservation work. It's one reason why we embrace the concept of participatory design in every project that we do. If we could wave a magic wand and put a park or a garden or a playground or a refuge on the ground instantly, we wouldn't do it. The process you go through, the engagement that happens, the sense of ownership, the sense of stewardship that come out the other end are absolutely vital. Once you have genuine and committed partners, we've seen from experience many moving stories of urban neighborhoods rising as one to pull off seemingly impossible projects. Now, everything I've read and seen from the Urban Refuge Initiative suggests that you fully understand and embrace this, so take these exhortations to partnership as reinforcing the rightness of what is clearly in your intended approach. I see there are many partners who are here in this room. Education and programming. Just having access to refuges and parks is often not enough. It's what goes on there to attract and engage people that will lead to attendance and connection. We applaud the services for recognizing this and the way you've shaped your presence partnerships. Good move, many of which seem to attune to this issue. Similarly, your standards of excellence also reflect this understanding. Now, one key nuance is making sure that materials are bilingual, being responsive. When someone said earlier, you've got to be responsive to your neighborhood. There is no one-size-fits-all here. And I would suggest, in addition, both in terms of partnership and in being responsive, that you think about hiring people from the communities in which you're trying to reach out. It has a wonderful impact, and we've seen that work in our projects as well. There was a myth in California that the Hispanic population didn't care as much as Anglos about parks and open space. But the reality is, after the last several bond initiatives in California, Hispanics way outvoted the rest of us when it came to a commitment to funding parks and open space, particularly in urban areas. So we've got constituencies out there that care deeply, but we need to think about how we best address those constituencies. And then finally, with public funding. And all of this, I think, is for naught if we don't have the resources with which to move ahead. And it's particularly challenging right now. There are a lot of arcane, interesting funding sources out there, and some of, whether we're working with HUD, whether we're getting Tiger grants, I mean, there are a lot of things that we as an organization really focus on, but there are a couple that are absolutely critical that are in danger. We need to continue with the important federal work we're doing together in Washington to support the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It provides funding for federal funding and to states for local conservation. We also need to support the Urban Park and Recreation Recovery Program, or UPAR, wonderful acronym, which funds the restoration of underperforming urban parks. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is the granddaddy of federal funding for protecting our public lands, where so many recreate and on which so many species depend. The nearly 50-year-old funding program takes some of the proceeds from resource extraction and offshore oil lease revenues and puts them back into protecting resources at both the federal and state level. It was originally authorized at $900 million, wasn't indexed, who knows where it would be today, multi-billions on an annual basis, but has been rarely appropriated at the full amount. It's sunsetting in 2015, and we and many others are particularly concerned in working to secure full funding and reauthorization for this critical conservation funding source. Recent history suggests one thing's for sure. If the Land and Water Conservation Fund continues to tread water at its current funding levels, it is unlikely that urban projects like Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge will proliferate. These kinds of acquisitions are up against a broad swath of more traditional conservation needs in wild places and have not tended to fare well in lean times. So for this reason, it's really important that urban constituencies find their voice in support of Land and Water Conservation Fund, as well as UPAR, which was dead for 10 years, but found its way back into the president's budget this year for about $20 million. So we're cautiously optimistic because that too can provide an important source of funding for the initiative that we all in this room care about. So those are a few thoughts that I hope are helpful as we think about how to make this initiative a success. And we really want to see that happen. We truly want to partner with you on making these refuges happen. We think it's absolutely critical, as you do as well. I want to thank each and every one of you for what you're doing to make a difference. And I'll close with a couple of quotes from that other Will Rogers, the cowboy humorist who never met a man he didn't like or said, "Buy land, they ain't making it anymore." One of my favorite quotes of his was, "Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there." The other one is, "Never miss a good opportunity to shut up." So thanks very much.